सेशन बाय ग्रो। तो पहले मैं अपने आप को इंट्रोड्यूस कर देती हूँ। मेरा नाम है नम्रता और मेरी कंपनी का नाम है नोवाइज लर्निंग एकेडमी। हम पिछले 13 सालों से द लास्ट 13 इयर्स हम लोग ट्रेनिंग स्पेस में हैं और ग्रो के साथ हम पिछले ऑलमोस्ट 1 साल से एसोसिएटेड हैं, वेयर वी बीन डूइंग दीज सेशंस कॉल्ड इंडिया करेगा इन्वेस्ट। ये कैंपेन ग्रो का बहुत इंटरेस्टिंग कैंपेन है और इसमें हम हर हफ्ते एक कोई नया टॉपिक लेके आते हैं। हम पहले ऑब्वियसली पैंडेमिक से पहले ये सेशंस लाइव सेशंस करते थे, ऑफलाइन सेशंस, लेकिन अब बिकॉज ऑफ द पैंडेमिक वी स्विच टू द ऑनलाइन मोड। बट इट्स अ ग्रेट एडवांटेज क्योंकि हम ज्यादा लोगों के साथ इंटरेक्ट कर सकते हैं बिकॉज ऑफ दिस पर्टिकुलर मीडियम। सो थैंक यू फॉर जॉइनिंग अस। आज हमारे साथ हैं मिस्टर एंथनी, जो सीईओ और डायरेक्टर हैं बरोड़ा एएमसी के, एंड वी ऑल्सो हैव मिस्टर शिखर फ्रॉम ग्रो। So 3 of us will be addressing all of you. आज का टॉपिक बहुत इंटरेस्टिंग है। आज का टॉपिक है इन्वेस्टिंग अपॉर्चुनिटीज इन द लार्ज एंड द मिड कैप स्पेस इन द करंट मार्केट्स। ओके, तो फ्लो ऐसा रहेगा कि पहले मैं आप सबको एड्रेस करूंगी फॉर 15 odd minutes। उसके बाद मिस्टर एंथनी विल टेक ओवर और फिर विल हैव शिखर हु इज गोइंग टू टेल अस अबाउट द ग्रो प्लेटफॉर्म। सो लेट्स गेट स्टार्टेड एंड आई होप ऑल ऑफ यू एंजॉय द सेशन। तो सबसे पहले मैं अपना स्क्रीन शेयर कर लेती हूँ। ओके, सो लाइक वी सेड, हम आज क्या डिस्कस करने वाले हैं कि लार्ज कैप और मिड कैप स्पेस में इन्वेस्टमेंट अपॉर्चुनिटीज क्या हैं आज की तारीख में, कंसिडरिंग वी आर इन नॉट अ ग्रेट इकोनॉमिक सिचुएशन एट दिस पॉइंट इन टाइम। तो लार्ज और मिड कैप्स में हम कैसे इन्वेस्ट कर सकते हैं। तो ये पूरा जो मैंने अपना सेशन इसको स्प्लिट किया है, पहले मैं आपको एक बेसिक इंट्रोडक्शन दूंगी लार्ज और मिड कैप्स के ऊपर। उसके बाद आई टेल यू कि अगर आपको लार्ज और मिड कैप स्टॉक्स खरीदने हैं तो आप क्या कर सकते हैं। उसके बाद विल आल्सो कवर अप ऑन म्यूचुअल फंड्स लार्ज एंड मिड कैप स्पेस में, और फिर अभी की तारीख में हमें लार्ज और मिड कैप में इन्वेस्ट करना चाहिए या नहीं करना चाहिए। दैट इज माय फ्लो। ओके, सो फर्स्ट लेट्स गिव अ बेसिक इंट्रोडक्शन कि लार्ज और मिड कैप्स होता क्या है, राइट। लार्ज कैप स्टॉक्स क्या होते हैं, जो हमारा स्टॉक एक्सचेंज होता है उसमें जो टॉप 100 स्टॉक्स रहते हैं, राइट, द टॉप 100 स्टॉक्स व्हिच आर लिस्टेड दे आर कॉल्ड लार्ज कैप स्टॉक्स। मिड कैप स्टॉक्स जो होते हैं 101 to 250, तो हर स्टॉक की एक रैंकिंग होती है और जो टॉप 100 स्टॉक्स होते हैं रैंक के हिसाब से बेस्ड ऑन मार्केट कैपिटलाइजेशन, उसको हम लार्ज कैप बोलते हैं। 101 और 250 की जो रैंकिंग होती है बेस्ड ऑन मार्केट कैपिटलाइजेशन, उसको हम मिड कैप बोलते हैं। लेकिन अब ये समझना चाहिए कि मार्केट कैपिटलाइजेशन क्या होता है। सो मार्केट कैपिटलाइजेशन इज नथिंग बट जो कंपनी के, जो किसी भी एक कंपनी के आउटस्टैंडिंग शेयर्स हैं उसका मार्केट वैल्यू क्या है। सो फॉर एग्जांपल, अगर एक किसी कंपनी के 2000 शेयर्स हैं मार्केट में और हर शेयर का प्राइस है 50 रुपए, तो मार्केट कैपिटलाइजेशन बिकम्स 1 crore। सो इट्स अ वेरी सिंपल वे ऑफ अंडरस्टैंडिंग मार्केट कैपिटलाइजेशन। नेक्स्ट, अगर हम ये देखें कि आज की तारीख में बॉम्बे स्टॉक एक्सचेंज में अप्रोक्सीमेटली 5000 स्टॉक्स लिस्टेड हैं और नेशनल स्टॉक एक्सचेंज में अप्रोक्सीमेटली 1800, so 1790 stocks are listed on the national stock exchange. So now what I want to do is I want to show you the performance. Okay, अगर हम लार्ज कैप का परफॉर्मेंस देखें इन द लास्ट 6 months, तो ये 6 महीने का डेटा है निफ्टी 50 का अगर हम देखें, सो एज यू कैन सी लार्ज कैप मार्च में काफी गिरा था, राइट, लेकिन इट हैज रिकवर्ड प्रीटी वेल। ओके, लार्ज कैप इंडेक्स हैज रिकवर्ड क्वाइट वेल इन द लास्ट 6 months। अगर हम मिड कैप देखिए, इट्स द सेम स्टोरी। मिड कैप जो है वो भी ये निफ्टी मिड कैप 100 का डेटा है 6 महीने का। ये भी काफी गिरा था मार्च में, लेकिन इट हैज रिकवर्ड क्वाइट वेल इन द लास्ट फ्यू मंथ्स। अगर हम सेक्टरल परफॉर्मेंस देखें ना, हम सब हमेशा जब भी स्टॉक्स के बारे में बात करते हैं वी लाइक टॉकिंग अबाउट सेक्टर्स। ओके, तो मैं आपको ये वो 5 सेक्टर्स दिखाती हूँ जिन्होंने पिछले 4-5 महीने में एक्चुअल अच्छा किया है। ठीक है, ये 5 सेक्टर्स अगर हम देखें, स्टार्टिंग विद आईटी, फेब 2020 में ये सब निफ्टी के सेक्टरल इंडेक्सेस हैं। तो दिस लाइक निफ्टी आईटी, दिस इज निफ्टी फार्मा। तो इसमें अगर हम फेब 2020 में देखें, इट वाज एट 16,700 लेवल्स। मार्च में ये गिरा टू 11,000 ऑड लेवल्स, लेकिन अभी अगस्त में इट हैज ऑलरेडी गॉन अप टू 18,000 लेवल्स, व्हिच मींस इट हैज ऑलरेडी रिकवर्ड क्वाइट वेल। अगर हम फार्मा देखें, ओके, फार्मा जो है 8,300 लेवल्स पे था, मार्च में वो हो गया, वो गिरा करीब 6,400 लेवल्स पे और अब ये है 11,000 पे। ओके, हम सब बोलते हैं, राइट, आईटी अच्छा कर रहा है, एफएमसीजी अच्छा कर रहा है, फार्मा अच्छा कर रहा है। सो आई एम जस्ट शोइंग यू कि ये सेक्टर्स जो हैं कैसा कर रहे हैं। FMCG फेब में 31,000 पे था, मार्च में 23,000 पे गिरा और अब 31,000 पे वापस आ चुका है। अगर हम ऑटो सेक्टर देखें, 8,000 लेवल्स पे था, 4,000 तक गिरा और अब ऑलमोस्ट 8,000 पे वापस आ चुका है। और अगर हम एनर्जी सेक्टर देखें, वो 15,000 पे था, 9,000 पे गिरा एंड इट इज ऑलमोस्ट एट 15,960। लेकिन जब हम सेक्टर्स की बात करते हैं ना, व्हाट्स अ वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग थिंग, हम बोलते हैं कि अच्छा ये सेक्टर अच्छा कर रहा है तो इसके स्टॉक्स उठा लेते हैं, ठीक है। व्हाट यू हैव टू अंडरस्टैंड इज दैट अगर कोई भी एक सेक्टर अच्छा कर रहा है, इसका मतलब ये नहीं है कि उस सेक्टर में सारे स्टॉक्स अच्छे कर रहे हैं। प्लीज अंडरस्टैंड दैट just because one sector is doing well, it doesn't mean that all the stocks in that sector are doing well. ये ऐसा है कि कुछ stocks की वजह से the sector is doing pretty well, and I'm going to show you that exactly. Okay, so what I'm going to show you is कि हमें sector में invest करना चाहिए या stocks में invest करना चाहिए, right? Look at this, ये है Nifty का IT index. Okay, this is Nifty IT. अगर आप 6 महीने का डेटा देखें, look at the 6 month returns. एम्फोसिस ने ऑलमोस्ट 32% ऊपर गया है, ठीक है। नेक्स्ट इज इन्फोसिस जो 19% है, ऑलमोस्ट 20% है। टोटल निफ्टी आईटी इंडेक्स में करीब 15 स्टॉक्स हैं, जिसमें से सिर्फ 7 स्टॉक्स ने पॉजिटिव रिटर्न्स दिए हैं, बाकी सब नेगेटिव रहे हैं। ओके, और इन 7 स्टॉक्स में से भी एज यू कैन सी डिफरेंस कितना है, इट्स नॉट सिमेट्रिक रिटर्न, द रिटर्न्स आर वेरी एसिमेट्रिक, क्योंकि टाटा कंसल्टेंसी ने सिर्फ 4% ऊपर गया है, ये 32% ऊपर गया है। तो अगर मान लीजिए आपने टीसीएस का स्टॉक लिया होता वर्सेस एम्फोसिस का स्टॉक लिया होता, यू कैन इमेजिन द काइंड ऑफ डिफरेंस इन योर रिटर्न। सो जस्ट बिकॉज आईटी सेक्टर अच्छा कर रहा है, इसका मतलब ये नहीं है कि सारे स्टॉक्स अच्छे कर रहे हैं, राइट। अब अगर हम एफएमसीजी देखें, एज यू कैन सी दिस इज द 6 मंथ रिटर्न्स, टाटा कंज्यूमर प्रोडक्ट्स में 44% ऊपर गया है, लेकिन देन यू ऑल्सो जुबिलेंट जो सिर्फ 5% ऊपर गया है, बाकी सब ने नेगेटिव रिटर्न्स दिए हैं, चाहे वो नेस्ले हो, डाबर हो, हिंदुस्तान लीवर हो एंड सो ऑन, राइट। अगर हम फार्मा देखें, फार्मा शायद एक ऐसा सेक्टर था जिसमें सारे स्टॉक्स पॉजिटिव में रहे हैं, लेकिन अगर आप एल्कम खरीदते वर्सेस सिप्ला खरीदते, यू सी द डिफरेंस, सिप्ला 75% ऊपर गया है, whereas एल्कम सिर्फ 7%. ओके, सो आई होप यू आर अंडरस्टैंडिंग व्हाट आई एम ट्राइंग टू टेल यू। सेम लॉजिक अप्लाइज टू ऑटो, जहां हीरो मोटोकॉर्प में 31% ऊपर गया है, यू ऑल्सो हैव बजाज ऑटो जो ऑलमोस्ट 1% नीचे गया है, राइट। नाउ अ वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग सेक्टर दैट आई वांट टू टॉक अबाउट इज एनर्जी। एनर्जी सेक्टर एक ऐसा सेक्टर है जिसमें सिर्फ 2 स्टॉक्स ने पॉजिटिव रिटर्न्स दिए हैं, लेकिन वो सेक्टर पूरा अच्छा किया है जस्ट बिकॉज ऑफ दोस 2 स्टॉक्स। सिर्फ रिलायंस इंडस्ट्रीज और टाटा पावर, दीज आर दी ओनली 2 स्टॉक्स दैट वर पॉजिटिव, बाकी सब नेगेटिव में हैं, लेकिन फिर भी ये सेक्टर अच्छा कर रहा है। तो अगर मान लीजिए आपको कोई बोले कि एनर्जी सेक्टर बहुत अच्छा कर रहा है, एनर्जी सेक्टर के स्टॉक्स खरीद लेते हैं, लेकिन मान लीजिए आपने गेल इंडिया या अदानी ट्रांसमिशन का स्टॉक उठाया होता, तो यू वुड बी नेगेटिव टुडे, राइट। तो स्टॉक्स अगर लेने हैं तो उसके लिए यू हैव टू रियली गिव इट अ गुड थॉट। तो मैं पूरा स्ट्रैटेजीज अभी बताने वाली हूँ, बट व्हाट आई एम ट्राइंग टू टेल यू इज कि जस्ट बिकॉज कोई सेक्टर अच्छा कर रहा है, उसका मतलब ये नहीं है कि उस सेक्टर के सारे स्टॉक्स अच्छे कर रहे हैं। तो जब हम स्टॉक्स लेते हैं तो मे बी वन ऑफ द पैरामीटर्स कुड बी सेक्टर, लेकिन दैट कांट बी द ओनली पैरामीटर टू सिलेक्ट अ स्टॉक। ओके, सो लेट्स अंडरस्टैंड कि अगर हमें स्टॉक्स को आइडेंटिफाई करना है इन द मिड एंड लार्ज कैप कैटेगरी, तो हम क्या कर सकते हैं। ओके, so first you have to understand कि in times like these recessionary times it's the large caps will do well, right? Large caps काफी सेफ माने जाते हैं compared to all the other categories। ऐसा क्यों होता है? अगर हम लार्ज कैप देखें, रिडक्शन इन कंपटीशन, जब रिसेशन इस पैंडेमिक में देयर इज अ स्टडी व्हिच सेड कि ऑलमोस्ट 7 लाख बिजनेसेस शट डाउन हुए हैं, स्मॉल बिजनेसेस। इसका मतलब क्या है कि आपका जो लार्ज कैप के लिए अपॉर्चुनिटीज है दैट इज मच हायर, राइट। क्योंकि लार्ज कैप जो है दे टेंड टू हैव बेटर डीपर पॉकेट्स लाइक व्हिच आई एम गोइंग टू टॉक अबाउट। उनके पास पैसा ज्यादा रहता है टू रियली मैनेज टाइम्स लाइक दीज। एंड ऑल्सो जब गवर्नमेंट स्पेंडिंग होता है टाइम्स लाइक दिस, यू हैव इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर के ऊपर स्पेंडिंग या एनी ऑफ दिस गवर्नमेंट प्रोजेक्ट्स, वो हमेशा किसी बड़ी कंपनी को ही अपना प्रोजेक्ट देंगे, एंड दैट इज व्हेन योर लार्ज कैप कंपनीज स्टार्ट टू डू वेल। सो इसलिए लार्ज कैप स्टॉक्स आर डेफिनेटली वन ऑफ द कैटेगरी ऑफ स्टॉक्स दैट यू कुड लुक एट। ओके, अब दूसरा जो हम पैरामीटर देख सकते हैं वो है कि आप किस तरीके के इन्वेस्टर हैं। Are you a momentum style or a short-term investor, or are you a long-term investor? Is what you have to tell. Ask yourself that simple question कि मुझे शॉर्ट टर्म के लिए इन्वेस्ट करना है या लॉन्ग टर्म के लिए इन्वेस्ट करना है, क्योंकि दोनों में स्ट्रैटेजीज बहुत अलग रहेगा. कि शॉर्ट टर्म के लिए स्ट्रैटेजी अलग रहता है, लॉन्ग टर्म के लिए अलग रहता है. सो आस्क योरसेल्फ दैट वेरी सिंपल क्वेश्चन. ओके, और जब आपको पास वो आंसर हो, देन यू स्टार्ट डिसाइडिंग विच स्टॉक टू इन्वेस्ट इन बेस्ड ऑन दीज पैरामीटर्स. सो अगर आप मान लीजिए शॉर्ट टर्म इन्वेस्टर हैं, राइट, आई मीन यू आर only looking at it for 2-3 months kind of a thing, which is your short term horizon. तो आपको क्या पैरामीटर्स देखना चाहिए जब आप स्टॉक सेलेक्ट करते हैं? तो फर्स्ट इज मार्केट डायरेक्शन इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट, राइट. सो विच मीन्स आपको यू शुड हैव अ गुड आइडिया कि मार्केट किस तरफ जा रहा है, ऊपर की तरफ जा रहा है या नीचे की तरफ आ रहा है. बिकॉज मार्केट डायरेक्शन इन शॉर्ट टर्म इन्वेस्टिंग, टाइमिंग इज एवरीथिंग, राइट. लॉन्ग टर्म इन्वेस्टिंग में टाइमिंग उतना जरूरत या उतना नहीं मायने रखता है जितना शॉर्ट टर्म में मायने रखता है, क्योंकि शॉर्ट टर्म में यू आर ट्राइंग टू मेक क्विक रिटर्न्स, तो उसमें मार्केट टाइमिंग इज वेरी वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट. सो यू हैव टू अंडरस्टैंड कि मार्केट किस डायरेक्शन में जा रहा है. नेक्स्ट, ओनली सेलेक्ट दो स्टॉक्स दैट यू अंडरस्टैंड वेल. ठीक है, मतलब ऐसा नहीं कि हाँ किसी ने मुझे बोल दिया और मैं ये स्टॉक खरीद लेता हूँ, भले आपको उसके ऊपर ज्यादा कुछ पता ना हो. डू योर रिसर्च, अंडरस्टैंड कि अगर ये स्टॉक अच्छा कर रहा है तो क्यों कर रहा है. सो अंडरस्टैंड द स्टॉक, अंडरस्टैंड द कंपनी बिफोर यू इन्वेस्ट. और उसके लिए आपको अपना खुद का रिसर्च करना इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट. एंड आई एम गोइंग टू टॉक अबाउट दोज पैरामीटर्स एज वेल व्हिच यू शुड लुक एट, जो आपको काफी हेल्प करेंगे. नेक्स्ट इज लुक फॉर कंपनी अनाउंसमेंट्स. अगर आप शॉर्ट टर्म में इन्वेस्ट कर रहे हैं, ये बहुत मायने रखता है. मान लीजिए किसी कंपनी ने अनाउंस किया है कि देयर इज अ चेंज इन मैनेजमेंट, या फिर देयर इज अ बोनस शेयर हैपनिंग. So then कि शायद then you have to understand कि वो अनाउंसमेंट पॉजिटिव है या नेगेटिव है और उसका मार्केट पे इम्पैक्ट क्या होगा, राइट, उनके स्टॉक्स पे. सो कंपनी अनाउंसमेंट्स इज वन पैरामीटर दैट यू कुड लुक एट. द न्यूज इन द मार्केट, ये आपको ध्यान से सुनना चाहिए कि किस कंपनी के ऊपर क्या न्यूज आ रहा है. Next, monetary policy and fiscal policy announcements, right? I mean, nowadays we get to hear a lot of these. I mean, rate cuts हो रहे हैं, monetary policy cuts हो रहे हैं. तो that is one of the parameters that you should look at when you are deciding कि आपको कौन सा stock खरीदना है. Also, when it comes to identifying stocks, for example, sector specific. So मान लीजिए government का किसी एक specific sector पे बहुत focus है, then that is a sector that you could look at, और उसमें you can identify the right stocks, right? अब मान लीजिए monsoons बहुत अच्छा हुआ इस बार, so in all probability you can say कि शायद rural spending बढ़ेगा, शायद rural stocks might do well. So then that is the way to go. तो मतलब आपको जो है अभी जो जैसा सिनेरियो उसके ऊपर you should be deciding कि stocks कैसा खरीदना है. Fiscal policy announcements, there are tax cuts happening, a particular sector focus is happening. तो ये सब चीजें हमें देखनी चाहिए when we are investing for the short term. Loss aversion theory क्या होता है? हम पता है कभी कोई इन्वेस्टमेंट करते हैं ना, हम उसके बारे में बहुत इमोशनल हो जाते हैं. तो फॉर एग्जाम्पल मैंने किसी कंपनी का स्टॉक खरीदा एंड आई एम लाइक, अब मान लीजिए वो स्टॉक अच्छा नहीं कर रहा है, द शेयर प्राइस इज जस्ट गोइंग डाउन. हमें क्या लगता है, वी होल्ड ऑन टू इट, हम उसको पकड़े रखते हैं इन एंटिसिपेशन कि कभी तो अच्छा करेगा. तो अभी आपने क्या किया, इमीडिएटली फ्रॉम शॉर्ट टर्म यू बिकम अ लॉन्ग टर्म इन्वेस्टर, राइट. अगर आपका टाइम होराइजन शॉर्ट टर्म है, देन स्टे शॉर्ट टर्म. Don't get emotional about your investments is what I'm trying to tell you. Okay, if you invested for short term, then cut your losses and get out of it. Okay, don't hold on to something just because your call went wrong. अब आपका judgment गलत हो गया, इसका मतलब ये नहीं है कि आपको वो स्टॉक पकड़ के ही रखना है. Feel free to let go. Okay, short term में there's a definite disclaimer कि जब आप इन्वेस्ट करते हैं तो risk is definitely higher. तो अगर आपको शॉर्ट टर्म में इन्वेस्ट करना है तो यू शुड हैव अ डिसेंट रिस्क एपेटाइट इवन टू टेक लॉसेस. ओके, ना अगर हमें लॉन्ग टर्म में इन्वेस्ट करना है, राइट, ना इफ यू आर अ लॉन्ग टर्म इन्वेस्टर, देयर आर सर्टेन बेसिक गाइडलाइंस दैट यू शुड बी लुकिंग एट. फर्स्ट इज अंडरस्टैंडिंग द बिजनेस, दैट्स अ गिवन, राइट. सो व्हेन आई से अंडरस्टैंडिंग द बिजनेस, व्हाट डज इट मीन? हर बिजनेस का एक कंपेटिटिव एडवांटेज होता है जो आपको समझना चाहिए. सो लेट मी एक्सप्लेन दिस इन वेरी सिंपल टर्म्स. I don't know how many of you heard of moat. मोट क्या होता है? जब हमारे राजा महाराजाओं के टाइम में, राइट, जो होते थे, जो उनका जो कासल होता था उसके अराउंड एक मोट होता था. मोट इज अ वाटर बॉडी जिसमें जो है वो लोग क्रोकोडाइल्स डाल देते थे जिससे कि कोई एनिमी ऐसे नहीं आ पाए, राइट. That is nothing but in modern terms a competitive advantage. Okay, So let me give you an example. Don't take it as a stock tip. It is just an example to tell you how it works. तो मान लो आयशा मोटर्स का अगर हम स्टॉक देखें, ठीक है, इट हैज गिवन कंसिस्टेंट डबल डिजिट रिटर्न्स इन द लास्ट 10 years. अब उनका कंपेटिटिव एडवांटेज क्या है? You know, they are an aspirational segment. They belong to an aspirational segment. अगर बुलेट खरीद रहे हैं तो aspirational segment में आता है, लेकिन वो उतना एक्सपेंसिव भी नहीं है जितना हार्ले डेविडसन होता है, करेक्ट? लेकिन वो उतना सस्ता भी नहीं है कि उसको कोई भी खरीद सकता है. So Aisha Motor Bullet comes in a very, very niche segment, and that is where they're able to maintain their competitive advantage. So understand the business कि उनका competitive advantage क्या है और उनका competitive advantage in the long term कैसे work out होगा before you take a call कि वो stock में invest करना है या नहीं करना है. Next, low debt to equity ratio, that's a given. मतलब आज के time में definitely go for those companies which have low debt. और ये information आपको definitely मिल जाएगा. Right? You have to look for companies that are, less on debt. Only those companies जिनका debt कम है वो आज की तारीख में sustain कर पाएंगे, right? Now, sales growth in the last 10 years. I mean, consistency is the key, right? अगर वो कोई भी stock, कोई भी company consistently year on year has shown consistent sales growth, then that's a good stock to pick, isn't it? So again, another example, Page Industries, right? Classic example. वो 1959 से it's been in the market. ऐसा नहीं कि उन्होंने कुछ बहुत diversify किया है. They cater to the jockey brand, the undergarment segment, and they have consistently improvised on their business efficiencies, on their operational efficiencies. So उनको diversify नहीं करना है, but वो बोलते हैं हमारा competitive advantage क्या है कि हम जो है अपने ही same business को will keep improvising. उन्होंने जो in terms of production they have started using so much technology and so on. So basically look at the sales growth. Page Industry has shown immense sales growth in the last 10 to 15 years. Then look at the profitability, of course. तो ये जो है मतलब basic parameters हैं which you can consider जब आप किसी भी एक company के stocks को खरीदना चाहते हैं. अब जो है sector wise, there are different filters that you can put. तो हर sector का एक अलग filter you can decide. तो मैं आपको 2 sectors के filter दिखाती हूँ and आप बाकी हर sector की you can figure out your own filters. So for example, if you're looking at sectors which are not doing so well. So for example, अगर हम banking sector देखें, right? जैसे मैंने आपको IT, pharma, FMCG सब दिखाया था, they have all recovered. लेकिन banking sector अभी तक recover नहीं किया है. Banking जो गिरा था 31,000 level से, वो अभी तक से 21,000 levels पे ही है. Banking sector is not recovered. So do you think it's a good industry or a sector to invest in? Yes, क्योंकि अभी इसका recovery बाकी है. So which means you can definitely look at investing in the banking sector. लेकिन वो क्या filters देखने चाहिए to pick the right stock is what I'll tell you, right? तो अगर आपको sector specific banking filter देखना है तो for example capital adequacy ratio, right? Now capital adequacy ratio जितना ज़्यादा होगा उतना अच्छा है. अगर हम CASA देखें, just CASA to the term deposit ratio, वो जितना ज़्यादा होगा उतना अच्छा है, right? If you look at the gross NPA जितना कम होगा उतना अच्छा है, right? Net interest margins, what's the net interest margin for the bank? वो जितना ज़्यादा होगा उतना अच्छा है. So these are some of the filters in the banking space. आप अपने you can come out with more filters. I'm just saying ये एक sector specific banking के लिए filters that you can put अगर आपको banking stock identify करना है तो. अब अगर हम retail के लिए देखें, so what are the filters for retail? कितने stores हैं, margins कितना है merchandise के ऊपर, owned stores to franchisee ratio, average sales per store, total sales per square feet. These are such amazing simple filters जो आप अपने आप डाल सकते हैं logic लगा के to understand कि ये sector में इस कौन सी stock में हमें invest करना है, right? So this is some of the filters that I gave you. For every sector you can come out with logical filters, okay? Now let's move on to the mutual fund space. So ये हम stocks के बारे में बात कर रहे थे. अगर हम mutual funds के बारे में बात करें, right? Large cap and mid cap mutual funds क्या होते हैं? So large cap funds are nothing but जिसमें जो stock allocation 80% is in large caps. बाकी 20% can be in mid or small in other categories, but your 80% allocation in large caps is a large cap fund, and mid cap is 65% allocation in mid caps, which means अगर at least जो stocks हैं portfolio में 65% of them should belong to the mid cap category. बाकी 35% could belong to large or small or any other category. अब इसमें I'll tell you a very interesting thing, जब markets मान लो market ऊपर जा रहा है, ठीक है, और हम लोग क्या बोलते हैं कि अरे मार्केट तो ऊपर जा रहा है लेकिन माय फंड इज नॉट गिविंग मी रिटर्न्स, ऐसा क्यों हो रहा है, ठीक है। अब यू हैव टू अंडरस्टैंड, लार्ज कैप में मैंने क्या बोला था, टॉप 100 स्टॉक्स, मिड कैप में 101 टू 250 स्टॉक्स। लेकिन जब हम मार्केट के बारे में बात करते हैं, हम किसकी बात करते हैं, सेंसेक्स या निफ्टी की, ठीक है। अभी सेंसेक्स में कितने स्टॉक्स होते हैं, 30, निफ्टी में कितने स्टॉक्स होते हैं, 50। लेकिन हम क्या बोलते हैं, हम वो 30 या 50 स्टॉक्स को देख के बोलते हैं कि अरे ये सेंसेक्स या ये तो मार्केट तो ऊपर जा रही है लेकिन मेरा फंड अच्छा नहीं कर रहा है, राइट। So you are comparing apples with oranges is what I'm trying to tell you. That's a completely wrong comparison in that sense. Another parameter is ये जो मान लो लार्ज कैप में जो बाकी 20% है वो कहाँ पे इन्वेस्ट हुआ है, that is also important, right? 20% can make a reasonable difference. तो 20% स्मॉल कैप्स में हो सकता है, मिड कैप्स में हो सकता है. So then that makes a lot of difference in terms of the large cap performance. मिड कैप्स में जो 35% है वो किसमें इन्वेस्ट है, उसके बेसिस पे योर मिड कैप फंड्स कुड आल्सो डू वेल और नॉट डू वेल, राइट। तो जब आप ये देखते हैं कि कोई फंड अच्छा कर रहा है या नहीं कर रहा है, उसको आप डायरेक्ट सेंसेक्स या निफ्टी के साथ कंपेयर नहीं कर सकते, ओके। नाउ हाउ टू सेलेक्ट लार्ज एंड मिड कैप फंड्स इज व्हाट आई एम गोना टेल यू। तो अगर आपको लार्ज एंड मिड कैप फंड सेलेक्ट करना है तो व्हाट आर द पैरामीटर्स दैट यू शुड लुक एट। I think first look at the track record, right? Look at the consistency in terms of returns over the years. And when I say over the years, ऐसा नहीं है कि आपने सिर्फ 1-2 साल का परफॉर्मेंस देखा, कम से कम 8 से 10 साल का परफॉर्मेंस देखिए। तो ऑब्वियसली वो जो कंसिस्टेंसी रहना चाहिए, दैट शुड बी विद द इंडेक्स एंड विद द पीयर ग्रुप। तो ये जो आप चार्ट देख रहे हैं, ये है विद द इंडेक्स। तो जो ब्लू लाइन है, दैट इज वन ऑफ द फंड्स, इट्स अ लार्ज कैप फंड, मैं नाम नहीं बताऊंगी, बट इट्स अ लार्ज कैप फंड। एज यू कैन सी, Jan 13 से लेके जुलाई 2020 तक, विच इज अभी तक, ये कंसिस्टेंटली जो है इसने इंडेक्स को बीट किया है। दैट्स अ गुड पैरामीटर टू लुक एट, राइट। अगर कोई भी फंड कंसिस्टेंटली इंडेक्स को बीट कर रहा है, इट्स अ गुड थिंग। वर्सेस पीयर ग्रुप, तो मान लीजिए आपको व्हेन आई से पीयर ग्रुप, सो व्हाट यू लुक एट इज, अगर आपको लार्ज कैप में इन्वेस्ट करना है, 5 कोई भी अच्छे लार्ज कैप फंड्स उठाइए और उनका जो है 10 साल का परफॉर्मेंस देखिए। पीयर ग्रुप में जो है यू विल अंडरस्टैंड कि कौन सा फंड बेटर कर रहा है, राइट। सो यू हैव टू लुक एट अ कंसिस्टेंसी इन परफॉर्मेंस विद द पीयर ग्रुप एज वेल, व्हिच इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट, ओके। नेक्स्ट इज यू हैव टू अंडरस्टैंड योर लार्ज एंड मिड कैप्स आर नॉट फॉर शॉर्ट टर्म। ये ऐसा नहीं है कि आपने आज इन्वेस्ट किया और आप 6 महीने बाद बोले कि मुझे अच्छा रिटर्न्स चाहिए। These funds are only for those long-term disciplined investors, okay? Next, look at the rolling return. Now, rolling return is another very important parameter, क्योंकि rolling return में आपको जो है consistent returns का पता चलता है. So definitely look at the rolling returns. Next is pick funds with different styles, okay? Now this is very interesting. एक तो वैल्यू स्टाइल होता है और एक ग्रोथ स्टाइल होता है, राइट। तो अगर हम वैल्यू स्टाइल और ग्रोथ स्टाइल में देखें तो इन्वेस्टमेंट स्टाइल क्या है उस फंड का। सो फॉर एग्जांपल, ये जो आपकी स्क्रीन में है, दिस फंड प्रीटी मच बिलोंग्स टू द लार्ज कैप कैटेगरी, लेकिन ये ब्लेंडेड स्टाइल इन्वेस्टमेंट स्टाइल है, व्हिच मींस वैल्यू और ग्रोथ स्टाइल दोनों तरीके के स्टॉक्स इस फंड में रहेंगे। अब अगर आप ये देखें तो दिस इज अगेन अ लार्ज कैप फंड, दिस इज अगेन अ लार्ज कैप कैटेगरी एज यू कैन सी, लेकिन इसमें जो इन्वेस्टमेंट स्टाइल है वो ज्यादा ग्रोथ स्टाइल है। सो व्हिच मींस अगर आपको 2 लार्ज कैप में इन्वेस्ट करना है, फॉर एग्जांपल, यू कुड लुक एट इन्वेस्टिंग इन वन फंड व्हिच इज मोर ग्रोथ स्टाइल, वन व्हिच इज मोर ब्लेंडेड स्टाइल, ओके। सो आपने डाइवर्सिफाई किया है। सो ये म्यूचुअल फंड्स में डाइवर्सिफिकेशन इज द की। आप जितना ज्यादा डाइवर्सिफाई करेंगे उतना आपके लिए अच्छा होगा, राइट। Then look at funds which have less overlap. अब overlap क्या होता है? So let me show you this, okay? मैंने फंड्स के नाम निकाल दिए हैं। Now just look at this. अगर मान लीजिए हम ये A फंड देखें वर्सेस H फंड, इसमें दिखा रहा है 26.48% overlap, which means इसमें जो स्टॉक्स का ओवरलैप है वो 26%, which means there are almost 26% common stocks in both the funds, okay? जितना कम ओवरलैप हो उतना ज्यादा अच्छा है। तो अगर आपने 2 फंड्स में इन्वेस्ट किया है तो उसमें जो स्टॉक्स का ओवरलैप है वो जितना कम से कम हो उतना बेटर है, क्योंकि अगर ज्यादा ओवरलैप है तो आप एक ही फंड में इन्वेस्ट करिए ना। बात तो एक है कि स्टॉक्स अगर इतने सारे ओवरलैप करें, देन देयर इज नो पॉइंट इन्वेस्टिंग इन 2 डिफरेंट फंड्स। तो फॉर एग्जांपल, अगर हम ये आई फंड और यू फंड देखें, ठीक है, इसमें ऑलमोस्ट 58% का ओवरलैप है। अब 58% का ओवरलैप मींस 58% ऑफ योर स्टॉक्स आर कॉमन। तो फिर इन दोनों फंड्स में इन्वेस्ट करने का फायदा ही नहीं है, सिर्फ एक में इन्वेस्ट कर लीजिए, इट्स इनफ, राइट। सो लुक एट द फंड्स व्हिच हैव लेसर ओवरलैप, व्हिच इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट, ओके। Now, is it a good time to invest in large and mid caps? Yes, I do think it is a good time to invest in large and mid caps, but few parameters, few things that you should keep in mind. Like I said, ये सिर्फ long term के लिए है, so hold the portfolio for long term. don't get driven by emotions. Apply your logic, please. Okay. And it's very important कि अभी आप SIP या STP मोड के थ्रू ही जाएं. So STP मोड मान लो आपको लमसम इन्वेस्ट करने, then do an STP. नहीं तो आप SIP कर सकते हैं, क्योंकि अभी जब volatility है मार्केट में तो it will average out your units, right? And diversification is the key. I mean, within your funds that you're buying, diversify. जो मैंने parameters बोले थे उनके basis पे. So yes, so that's it from my side. Thank you so much. Anthony, over to you. Please take it on from here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Namrata. And thank you to Groww for giving us this opportunity. I'm going to take on from where Namrata left off. But I just wanted to, before I start sharing a presentation, just speak about a couple of things that are, I think, very important when it comes to long-term equity investing. Obviously, given that we represent a mutual fund, we focus more on the long-term side of the market. The first point I want to make to the audience कि आपका हमेशा you have to be clear when you are investing in equity. The first thing you need to be clear about is why you're doing it. Very often we get involved in the discussion ki market Sensex abhi 38,000 hai, is that too high, is it too low, Reliance Industries अच्छा लग रहा है या नहीं लग रहा है. But the simple fundamental reason you invest in equity has to be because there is some goal that you want to kind of achieve. And to my mind, in the long term, wealth creation in this country can only happen now from equity. In the past, it has also obviously happened from real estate, but there are multiple issues that we can always discuss at separate forums. But at this juncture, it's very clear that equity is probably the only asset class that can give you the chance to create wealth, which is probably the kind of goal जो सबको पता है और सबको प्यारा है. The second aspect I want to talk to you about, which is an aspect which has come from many hard lessons that I have personally learned from being in this market for close to 25 years, is that on one hand, certain चीजें हैं market में which is true irrespective of how many things change. For example, अगर आपको genuinely equity से wealth create करना है, तो the one thing you have to give is time. There is very, very little chance that you will have a 60-70% strike rate if you keep having a 6-month or a 1-year kind of time frame when you're investing in equity. But the moment you have time frames of 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, and you can look at many, many successful investors in the Indian marketplace or even overseas, one of the biggest reasons they have become as wealthy as they have from equity is purely because they have given time. And within that kind of rigid principle of giving time, the other thing that I have obviously also learned over the last 25 years is respect the market. The market is greater than any individual or collection of individual ka knowledge. And when markets tend to behave in a particular manner, it's always important to kind of look at that and understand and change your opinion if need be, because being able to understand those changes are sometimes the biggest reason you are able to kind of remain invested and make money. I'll start sharing the screen. Obviously, the main topic of discussion is large cap and mid caps. Is it the right time to invest in either of them or both of them? But I always feel that one has to discuss this in the context of markets. End of the day, that is the fundamental reason or background why investments happen. And I'm just going to start the screen share. So just a kind of quick background over the last 6 months and what our view right now is. So obviously the first point आप जो देखते हैं कि COVID-19 का impact, which is obviously a continuing impact on the economy, and month of March में everybody is very aware the markets corrected very, very sharply. In many kind of ways you look at it, it corrected more sharply than ever before. Including 2008 ka crisis, and that was probably because people felt that virtually the end is near. कि इसके आगे तो कुछ दिख नहीं रहा है, and the reality is that everything is going to crumble. As time has passed, the first thing that has changed, and this is something that one has to understand, is now become virtually a given response whenever there is a crisis, is central banks across the world, who obviously cannot afford a crisis to last for too long, immediately make available money in as easy a fashion and as cheap a fashion as possible. ये 2008-9 में भी हुआ था, 2000 टेक क्राइसिस के बाद भी हुआ था, इस बार भी हुआ है. इनफैक्ट इस बार it has happened at a even higher level than it has ever happened before. And one of the very natural consequences, जब पैसा is easily available to many institutions across the world, the money may be made available by the central banks because they believe that businessmen need it to be able to run their businesses efficiently. But money is an animal that cannot be controlled. And so when you have an easy availability of money, it will start chasing the best possible avenue to generate a return. And very often equity tends to, because of the kind of meltdown or crash that one has seen, tends to become the most appealing opportunity at that point. Also remember that equity market, amongst all the asset classes you can invest, भले आप fixed income देखे, gold देखे, real estate देखे, equity is a forward looking market, right? Ultimately when we discuss equity, we always talk about a forward PE, and which is why you have seen a lot of the money starting to look at equity assets in India as well as the rest of the world, and that has been the starting point. The third aspect which you have seen is that if you talk to anybody in March, because obviously conversations about equity markets are, when I started my career about 25 years ago, it was a very niche kind of industry. Equity market was not necessarily a coffee shop conversation or a social party or dinner conversation, but aaj ke tarik mein, everybody frankly in India is virtually a fund manager, if I was to put it in a lighter vein. Uh, and if you realize, everybody in the months of March and early April were talking about ki, there will be zero car sales, there will be industries that will shut down, there will be no jobs left, etc. And what people have seen actually happen in June and July is that things have not been as bad as expected. And you have to remember, and this I would say is a lesson that I would give you in general in terms of equity, is equity is not always an absolute thing. There is no black or white. It is, most of the time it is a gray, and sometimes you make more money by interpreting when gray is going to turn white rather than trying to find out ke kiska shirt safed zyada hai, right? The other aspect which is kind of been very, very unique to India is that all said and done, we have a very significant rural economy. While agriculture may be as a percentage of GDP not as significant as it was 30, 40 years ago, agriculture and rural economy are two different things. One must remember that. And two things have happened. One, the impact of the COVID pandemic in rural India has not been as much as urban India. But having said that, सबसे ज्यादा investor urban India में है. तो हमको लगता है कि, I often point people, and you may not be able to see it visibly now because my screen sharing is there. But when it's off, you can notice the kind of traffic outside my office window at the moment. There are clearly signs in the rural economy that things are almost back to normal. And the fact that because monsoon has been decent, etc., etc., people are clear that what they thought in March was the beginning of the end is now possibly a bad phase that we can possibly look like returning to normalcy by the year 2022, and that is what markets are responding to. At the same time, one must be clear that markets at this point are not cheap. They were cheap in March. At this point in time, they're trading at a slight premium to averages. But remember what I said in the beginning, if you want to genuinely become wealthy through investing in equity, you have to give time. The other lesson that I actually didn't mention, but I should mention, is you pinpoint the times when people have made maximum money from equity in the long term. It has been जब सबने कहा है कि boss, this is not the time to invest, right? So when everybody says that ये अभी बेचने का time आ गया, and you happen to be the courageous person who says नहीं, मुझे तो लगता है कि boss valuations ठीक है, recovery is around the corner, मुझे invest करना है, more often than not, you will be the happier person after 5 to 7 years. And so therefore, I think in the long term, which is a 5 to 7 year time frame, you actually should look at this time as an opportunity that has been given to you, rather than worry too much about अगले 3 महीने या अगले 6 महीने में मार्केट 10% ऊपर जाने वाला है कि 10% नीचे. Because frankly, and I can tell you this purely from experience, and no matter how proud I am of my ability, I have no clue how markets are going to be in the next 3 to 6 months. Nobody has a clue. At the end of the day, market behavior in the short term is always dictated by factors you will never be able to predict. But market behavior in the long term is always driven by fundamental factors. The other aspect I wanted to actually also highlight is that there is this conversation that happens कि भाई लेकिन boss equity markets in India तो बहुत ऊपर गई है. You know, Nifty was 7.5, 7,600 in March. Abhi to almost 11,300 tak aa gaya hai. We have probably missed the bus. See, this is a rally, as I mentioned, this is a global liquidity driven rally to start with. And so this rally has been across the board globally. And one of the ways that you look at it from a valuation standpoint sometimes is not necessarily कि ये इसका market का P क्या है, market का price to book value क्या है, but market cap to GDP. Especially in the context कि आज के तारीख में the biggest question mark is what is the economic impact of the COVID pandemic. And therefore, looking at the equity market overall cap as a percentage of the GDP becomes a far better valuation benchmark to think about than price earning multiple of the market as a whole, or price to book. These are all very important. But I think one of the useful things to bring about and for you to think about is agar aap dekhe, for example, if I look at, I'm not sure whether people will be able to see the cursor, but if you look at the second last US market, it is currently trading at about 1.7 times GDP, right? Compared to us, which is 0.73 times GDP. So just in context, markets are never as expensive as you think they are. There are various parameters you look at, and given that economic impact is a huge parameter at this point, this becomes a fairly useful barometer. The other aspect, like I mentioned, कि while सबने March में the kind of reports, one, you know, whether you look at WhatsApp University, Twitter University, even mainstream Economic Times, Business Standard, Mint, the prognosis was that it is almost doomsday. But the reality is that there are lots of green shoots that have been seen. Tractor sales are actually higher in June than last year. Two-wheeler sales are almost 70% of what they used to be. Electricity consumption is 95% of what it used to be last year. So point being that it's easy to predict doomsday, but sometimes, you know, markets can surprise and actual economic reality can surprise, and that is what has happened. The second graph talks about how the valuation between mid caps and large caps have narrowed, but I'm not going to spend that much time on it because I want to spend a lot of time on my next slide, which is, to my mind, the fundamental topic of today, right? Large caps and or mid caps. हम लोग काफी time पे, you know, when we write, we keep writing this word and stroke or, and I thought that's a very interesting way to title the slide. Ki, boss, is this the time to only look at large caps, or is this a time to only look at mid caps, or both? And my view is that this is probably the right time to look at both, and the reasons are the following. The first is the fact. The fact is कि last 30 महीने में the frontline stocks, or the large cap stocks, if you were to call it, have led the equity markets. Okay, small and mid cap indices have actually trailed the large cap indices by as high as 40%. Now, mind you, ये 40% absolute terms में है, because somebody may go back and say that by BSE Sensex is positive 9%, मिड कैप इंडेक्स इज -0.5, 40% कहां से आ गया? 40% is in absolute terms, which is effectively like a 9% annualized over a 3 to 4 year period. So that is the fact, right? But if you actually fundamentally look at it, why has that happened? See, in 2017, you actually had mid caps being the darling of the market. They were trading at an average P of roughly 45-50 times, which is close to their historic highs. If you look at their highs over last 20-30 years, 45 to 50 P is close to historic highs, virtually 2.2 times the average valuation of large caps. Okay, price to book agar aap dekhe to it was 0.9 times, very much again close to historic highs. Now when something trades close to a historic high, it will sustain it only if life is very good for that space in the next few years. But you actually see in point number 2 in the slide what has actually happened. You see the kind of reforms that have happened in last 2-3 years: demonetization, RERA, bankruptcy code, RBI adopting a new monetary policy framework which targets primarily inflation, so therefore agar growth slowdown ho raha hai to wo itna respond nahi karega, GST implementation. It is all meant ki for smaller and medium sized companies, the adjustment to all of this has taken far longer, right? Because at the end of the day, as now economists are willing to concede, demonetization, forget the argument ki was it successful, ki black money was taken out or not. But one thing is quite clear, is demonetization caused a slowdown in growth. That's a given, right? तो अगर आप मिड कैप कंपनी खरीद रहे थे in 2017 because आपको लगता है कि this company's growth is virtually assured to keep growing faster than large caps, and you have something like demonetization that puts a curb on growth on the entire economy, obviously the impact is felt higher by mid cap companies than large cap. And like I said, some of the other aspects also the same story, which basically means that you are buying mid cap stocks in 2017 at a significant premium to large caps, when actually the ground reality over the next 2-3 years for them has become far tougher. I am saying now look at the situation. Today everybody is trumpeting large caps, right? Everybody is saying that this is the darling of the market. COVID pandemic में the most common sense thing is large cap company survive करेगा, balance sheet strong है, banks are only willing to invest in large caps. But look at the kind of perspective slightly differently. Is the valuation of mid caps today the same it was in 2017? The actual answer is absolutely not. The average P's of mid caps relative to large cap companies today are trading at a historical below average. Number one, the current price to book at 0.75 is lower than the historic average. That is actually the reverse case for large caps. Uh, the market cap to GDP, like I showed you in the previous slide, for the market as a whole was 73%. आपको याद होगा वो slide में it was 73%. If you remember this particular slide, the range was 55 to 100. But mid caps today, so you look at market cap to GDP X Nifty, is actually below long-term averages. And so my simple point is that a lot of the factual points that you should use, which is the price earning, the price to book, the relative valuation of mid cap and small cap to large cap, that story has completely changed from 2017 to 2020. And if you remember my opening comment, always remember that the market will keep changing, trends will keep emerging. You will make money when you give your investment time and when you adjust to the trend. And which is pretty much the case. Somebody in 2017 who kept saying and ignoring the data and ignoring the evidence and kept investing in mid caps, because for example in 2018 people said abhi mid caps have fallen 15% in 2018, so 2019 mein recover to hoga hi. But the reality was these data points were not different. Today those data points are very, very different. And I want to the point number 3 is really, really important. Historically, over the last 40 years, the composition of the Sensex companies' profits as a percentage of total profits has been 56%. That's the historic high. In the quarter ended March 2020, we are almost close to that high. And history has always shown that eventually, once you reach that point, what is going to happen? The share of smaller and mid cap companies are going to start rising as a percentage of total profits because of the last point on the slide. I am a small or mid-sized company, right? जैसा नम्रता ने कहा था, I have been a victim in the last few years of higher interest cost. I have been a victim of adjustment to GST, etc. I have done all that adjustment, right? And in doing that adjustment, I am now blessed with an environment where interest rates are actually going to be cheap and easy, which means that if I'm able to borrow money with the perspective to grow my business, the impact of growth is going to be that much more significant. I will give you another example, and this is it's a bit of a story, but it's a bit of a factual story. Just to give it to you, because it's important to have, I would say, the right mindset at times rather than the right intellect. So we often look at US market, right? Almost in the last 3-4 months, it's almost like जो US market overnight हुआ है, वो अपना market में next morning it's going to be the direction of market. But in the 80s, the darling stock market of the world was actually not the US, it was not UK, it was not any stock market in Europe, it was actually Japan. Believe it or not, for those of you who may know, but I'm sure a lot of you don't know, stock market in Japan rose 6 times in that 10-year period. Okay, 6 times. 1990 to 2000 is often referred to, and आप कोई भी आप Google कर सकते हो, it is referred to as the lost decade in Japan. Because effectively, with all that glorious things that happened in the 80s, what then happened is the Japanese yen appreciated by 50% over the next 5 years, between 1990 to 95. Now, what lots of people in the stock market at that point thought, and I'm just giving you an analogy like how today we are thinking about large cap and mid caps, was the export oriented companies are going to die, right? Because suddenly whatever you are going to sell is now 50% more expensive for the person who's consuming in the US or the UK. By the end of 1995, the best performing stocks in the Japanese market were actually the export oriented companies like Toyota, like Fujifilm, like Kodak, for the simple reason that because they had seen the difficult times, they had prepared far more, and therefore they had reacted far better than somebody who thought that they are actually, since they are only focused on domestic consumption, unko koi farak nahi padta hai. I'm just giving this analogy because that I think is a very important mindset to have today, especially when think about large caps and mid caps, which is that there are no permanent winners. The other thing that I wanted to bring forward is that if you look at it from a long-term perspective, in flat or positive markets, mid caps will outperform, right? If you look at it from a fund category perspective, just as Namrata ne, she gave examples of the large and mid cap category, you'll clearly see that once you cross the 5-year kind of time frame, these are the typically types of equity funds: large cap, mid cap, multi cap, large and mid cap. And the moment you cross the 5-year time frame, that is when the magic of the large and mid cap kind of come to play. Now somebody may ask कि भाई आपके slide से तो, and given what you are saying, you are almost making a case only for mid caps. Why actually should we still consider large caps? I'll tell you why. While the data points may seem and suggest that the valuations may point towards a recovery and the fact that mid caps may perhaps lead the next 5 years of the market, we also have to remember that we are not at the end of the COVID pandemic. Therefore, we are not at the end of the economic possible downturn, which therefore means that there will be a reasonable bunch of mid caps that will actually not be able to weather the storm. And so therefore, it is better to have a strategy that is a mix of both than to have a one trick pony jo kehte hai, that I will either do only mid caps or either do only large caps. And which is why I think at this level of the market, given the kind of data points that I talked about, it makes a great amount of sense to look at that. And a large and mid cap fund in many ways is that, right? कि एक large cap का जो stability है, and the same time the higher growth potential of mid cap stocks. That's the best marriage that is possible. You look at this particular chart. Uh, this is an ideal large and mid cap fund portfolio if you get it right. You look at the companies in the at the top, Bajaj Finance, Britannia, Eicher, Berger. आपको पता है क्या कॉमन चीज था 2010 या 2011-12 ये कंपनी में? You may say there is nothing common, na, because Bajaj Finance is a finance company, Britannia is FMCG, Eicher is a auto company, Berger Paint is a paint company. You're absolutely right. लेकिन एक चीज और कॉमन था, they were all mid caps. एक और चीज कॉमन है, today they are all large caps, right? And you look at the companies listed below, Reliance Industries, TCS, Maruti, HUL. 10 years ago, they were large caps. Today also they are large caps. So the idea and the success of any good large and mid cap fund is आप ऐसे कंपनियों को आइडेंटिफाई कीजिए जो 10 साल के बाद आपका लार्ज कैप कंपोनेंट होगा पोर्टफोलियो में, and at the same time you try to have large cap stocks that are consistent. If you try to do the opposite कि आप exciting large cap stock को ले लो और stable mid cap stock को ले लो, then that frankly will defeat the purpose. So the idea is really to combine excitement, but at the same time temper that excitement with a little bit of stability by buying consistent high ROE, low debt to equity ratio kind of large cap companies. And which is why I think this becomes what one in our kind of technical parlance बोलते हैं all weather fund. भले वो बारिश हो, भले वो गर्मी हो, भले ठंडी हो. The point is I should not need to question कि is my fund the right fund for this type of market. If you're looking at an all-weather fund, then this becomes a ideal vehicle. I'll also take this opportunity to plug the fact that we currently have a launch of a large and mid-cap fund as well, which is currently on and shuts on August 31st. So for those of you who are convinced by our arguments and want to get the right mix of large and mid-cap stocks, I think this fund makes a lot of sense. I will close my presentation with only one insight, which is an interesting insight of, directly investing in stocks versus mutual funds. And to my mind, it's actually not a contest. Matlab, it is not ki either or. Again, it's not an and or. It's not an either or. It's an and. If you believe you have the time, you have the energy, you have the resources, you have the insight that you can buy a few companies directly, monitor them very actively, then fair play. But I would say in today's day and age, with an equity market that is quite complex, things that are changing virtually every quarter, a large bulk of your portfolio needs to come from mutual funds. I will give you one simple fact about my own personal portfolio. Believe me, I obviously oversee an investment team that buys stocks every day. So you would think कि बॉस मुझे थोड़ा सा तो घमंड है कि मुझे सब पता है कौन सा स्टॉक लेना है कौन सा स्टॉक नहीं लेना है. The last time I bought an equity stock, by the way, was 3 years ago. Okay. In the last 10 years, 90% of what I've invested in is mutual funds. And I'll tell you why. It's not because I think that I no longer have the talent to decide what to buy. I don't have the time, right? I get paid to identify good stocks and sectors for the fund that I'm employed with, right? And so therefore my closing comments would be that effectively use mutual funds and use large and mid cap funds at this point in time to build that all weather 5 to 7 year part of your portfolio. And I'm pretty convinced that if we were to have a similar conversation 5 years from now, there will be a lot of smiling faces. Thank you, and over to you, Shikhar.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the session. That's great, Anthony. Namaskar. Hello, everyone. Let's get started. Aapka Groww India Karega Invest pe swagat hai. I will be walking you through our Groww as a product and what all features we have and etc. etc. I will just very quickly share my screen. हाँ, तो सबसे पहले मैं ये बताना चाहूँगा कि ग्रो जो स्टार्ट हुआ वो क्यों स्टार्ट किया. तो आज से करीब 5 साल पहले 5-4 साल पहले हमारे जो founders थे, they were discussing and they realized that India में equity investment और ऐसे दूसरे इन्वेस्टमेंट ऑप्शंस में इन्वेस्ट करने का प्रेवलेंस उतना नहीं है, लोग उतना ज्यादा प्रेफर नहीं करते हैं ऐसे अलग अलग ऑप्शंस में इन्वेस्ट करना, एंड दैट इज लार्जली बिकॉज there's a small lack of अवेयरनेस. लोगों को पता नहीं है कि दूसरे ऑप्शंस क्या हैं. हम इंडिया में हम मोस्टली एफडी या गोल्ड पसंद करते हैं, और अगर पैसा बहुत ज्यादा हो तो हम उसे रियल एस्टेट में डालना पसंद करते हैं. लेकिन बहुत कम ही ऐसे इंडियंस हैं जो कि इक्विटी मार्केट्स या डेट मार्केट्स को एक्सप्लोर करते हैं. तो ये एक नॉलेज को बिल्डअप करने के लिए कि ये ऑप्शन भी है, दिस वाज वन ऑफ द रीजंस व्हाई ग्रो वाज स्टार्टेड. द नेक्स्ट वाज ट्रांसपेरेंसी. तो आपने देखा होगा कि ऐसे बहुत सारे इन्वेस्टर्स होते हैं स्टॉक मार्केट्स में या म्यूचुअल फंड्स में जो किसी दूसरे आदमी पे रिलाई करते हैं अपने इन्वेस्टमेंट्स को करने के लिए, एज इन दे वुड बी प्रॉब्ली relying on a friend or a relative for investment advice or even an advisor. So the thing is, many times people are just not aware of where the investments are, right? And there's nothing wrong with having an advisor for your investments. It's just that आपको भी पता होना चाहिए आपका पैसा कहाँ है. और इस पे भी काफी सोच किया, और उससे हमें पता चला कि लोग people find it very complicated. अपने ही इन्वेस्टमेंट्स के बारे में डिटेल्स देखना, उनके बारे में और जानना कि कहाँ इन्वेस्टमेंट है, कहाँ है, कितना पैसा है, क्या चल रहा है उसके साथ, इसको एक्सेस करना काफी दिक्कत हो रहा था लोगों को. और seeing this was one of the reasons why Groww was started, and obviously the third reason was to bring some kind of equality for all kinds of investors. जो बड़े इन्वेस्टर्स हैं उनको अच्छी सर्विस आराम से मिल जाती है, लेकिन जो छोटे इन्वेस्टर्स होते हैं जो शायद हर महीने सिर्फ 500 या 1000 रुपए इन्वेस्ट करना चाहते हैं, उनको सर्विस उतनी अच्छी नहीं मिलती थी. तो ये सर्विस एक लेवल प्लेइंग फील्ड लाने के लिए, सबको सारे इन्वेस्टर्स को एक जैसा सर्विस मिले, इसको इनेबल करने के लिए ग्रो को स्टार्ट किया गया था. तो चलिए अब ग्रो पे आते हैं. व्हेन यू ओपन द ऐप, जब आप ग्रो की ऐप खोलते हैं तो आपको ऐसा स्क्रीन दिखेगा. पहले वाले स्क्रीन में आपको ऊपर आप स्टॉक्स या म्यूचुअल फंड सर्च कर सकते हैं, और उसके ठीक नीचे आपको दो टैब्स दिख रही होंगी, एक है म्यूचुअल फंड्स और उसके बगल वाला है स्टॉक्स. तो जब आप म्यूचुअल फंड्स पे टैप करेंगे तो उसके नीचे ही आपको म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एक्सप्लोर स्क्रीन दिख रहा है, और अगर आप स्टॉक्स वाले स्टॉक्स पे टैप करेंगे तो उसके नीचे आपको स्टॉक्स का एक्सप्लोर स्क्रीन दिखेगा. ग्रो पे आप आराम से साइन अप कर सकते हैं. ये 100% पेपरलेस होता है. घर बैठे बैठे सिर्फ स्मार्टफोन या लैपटॉप के थ्रू आप साइन अप कर सकते हैं. देयर इज एब्सोल्युटली नो पेपर वर्क. आपका अगर केवाईसी नहीं हुआ है तो वो भी हम आपके लिए फ्री में करवा देते हैं. चलिए, ये स्क्रीन है म्यूचुअल फंड स्क्रीन. सो व्हेनेवर यू सर्च अ म्यूचुअल फंड, या जब भी आप किसी एक म्यूचुअल फंड के बारे में और डिटेल्स देखना चाहते हैं तो ऐसा स्क्रीन रहता है. इस स्क्रीन में म्यूचुअल फंड के बारे में ऐसी कोई भी जानकारी नहीं है जो आपको जाननी चाहिए और वो यहाँ ना हो. ऐसा सब कुछ है जो, I mean, if you're talking returns, if you want to see the past returns, the asset under management, इस फंड की NAV क्या है, इस फंड के फंड मैनेजर कौन है, इस फंड की जो टॉप होल्डिंग्स है, किस किस जगह पे ये फंड इन्वेस्ट करता है, और इसी फंड के सब कैटेगरी में दूसरे फंड के कंपैरिजन में इसका परफॉर्मेंस कैसा है, ये सारी चीजें आपको इस पेज पे मिल जाएंगी. म्यूचुअल फंड्स में आप ग्रो पे मंथली सिप कर सकते हैं, हर महीने सिप, या नहीं तो आप वन टाइम इन्वेस्टमेंट भी कर सकते हैं, जो कि काफी लोगों को पता नहीं होता है. इन वन टाइम इन्वेस्टमेंट आप एक बार इन्वेस्ट करते हैं और आपको दोबारा करने की जरूरत नहीं है जब तक आपको दोबारा फिर से ना लगे. तो म्यूचुअल फंड्स में ऐसा होता है कि लोग समझते हैं कि एसआईपी ही एक ऑप्शन है, सिप एक ऑप्शन है कि हर महीने पैसा कटेगा और वो इन्वेस्ट होगा, लेकिन ये वन टाइम ऑप्शन भी लोगों को एक्सप्लोर करना चाहिए. और सिप भी ऐसा नहीं है कि एक बार स्टार्ट कर दिया तो उसको शुरू रखना ही पड़ेगा. आप सिप को कभी भी कैंसिल भी कर सकते हैं. ये डैशबोर्ड है. दिस इज वेयर a summary of all your investments is. तो इसमें भी अगेन दो टैब्स हैं, म्यूचुअल फंड एंड स्टॉक्स. तो ये आपको जो स्क्रीन अभी दिख रहा है, दिस इज अ समरी ऑफ ऑल द म्यूचुअल फंड इन्वेस्टमेंट्स. ऐसे ही आप अगर स्टॉक्स पे टैप करेंगे तो आपको स्टॉक्स का डैशबोर्ड दिखेगा, जहां पे आपके सारे स्टॉक्स के इन्वेस्टमेंट्स दिखेंगे आपको. ये इसमें हर एक फंड पे अगर आप टैप करेंगे तो आप उस फंड के और डिटेल्स में जा सकते हैं। तो अगर मान लीजिए आपने यहाँ पे सबसे ऊपर वाले म्यूचुअल फंड पे टैप किया, जो कि जिसमें आपने इन्वेस्ट कर रखा है, तो उसमें अंदर जाएंगे तो आपको उस फंड के सारे पास्ट ट्रांजैक्शंस दिखेंगी, आपको उसका फोलियो नंबर दिखेगा, और जो भी उस स्पेसिफिक फंड से आपका जो रिलेशन है वो उसकी सारी डिटेल्स आपको मिल जाएंगी। और उसी पेज में नीचे, यानी कि अगर आप यहाँ किसी म्यूचुअल फंड पर टैप करते हैं तो ये वाला पेज खुला और ऊपर आपको दिख रहा है परचेस ट्रांजैक्शन, परचेस ट्रांजैक्शन, परचेस ट्रांजैक्शन। इसी तरह अगर मैंने रिडीम किया होता या अगर मैंने पैसे निकाले होते तो वहां पे रिडीम ट्रांजैक्शन लिखा था। और सबसे नीचे 2 ऑप्शंस हैं, इन्वेस्ट मोर, उसी म्यूचुअल फंड में और पैसा डालना, और एक रिडीम है। रिडीम मीन्स टेकिंग आउट योर मनी। जब भी आप चाहें किसी भी म्यूचुअल फंड से आप पैसा विथड्रॉ कर सकते हैं। इस बटन पे टैप करके आपको अमाउंट एंटर करना पड़ेगा कि कितना अमाउंट आप निकालना चाहते हैं और कंफर्म करना पड़ेगा, और आपका पैसा 3 से 4 दिन में आपके बैंक अकाउंट में पहुंच जाएगा। ऑब्वियसली मोस्ट म्यूचुअल फंड्स आप ये कर सकते हैं, लेकिन कुछ म्यूचुअल फंड्स में लॉक इन होता है, तो उस बात का ध्यान रखिएगा। ये है एनालिसिस टैब। तो एनालिसिस टैब आपको आपके सारे इन्वेस्टमेंट्स, जो आपका टोटल इन्वेस्टमेंट है, उसका एक समरी दिखाता है। व्हाट इट शोज यू इज आपने कितना पैसा कहाँ इन्वेस्ट कर रखा है। जैसे आपका कितना पैसा इक्विटी में लगा हुआ है, कितना डेट में लगा हुआ है, किस किस सेक्टर्स में कितना परसेंटेज आपका इन्वेस्टेड है। सो इट गिव्स यू अ वेरी नाइस ओवरव्यू ऑफ ऑल योर इन्वेस्टमेंट्स. On Groww, you can easily invest via various payment options, including UPI, net banking, NEFT, RTGS, and IMPS. आप ट्रैक एंड स्विच भी कर सकते हैं ग्रो पे। तो व्हाट ट्रैक एंड स्विच अलाउज यू टू डू इज, मान लीजिए आपका कहीं और इन्वेस्टमेंट है, आपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स में कहीं और इन्वेस्ट कर रखा है, और अब आप चाहते हैं कि वो ग्रो पे आ जाए, क्योंकि आपने मान लीजिए ग्रो में इन्वेस्टमेंट स्टार्ट कर दिया है, और आपको चाहिए, आपको अच्छा लगेगा कि सारा आपका एक जितना भी इन्वेस्टमेंट है, आपने कहीं कुछ यहाँ कर रहा हो और कहीं और कर रहा हो, आप चाहते हैं कि एक ही प्लेटफॉर्म पे आ जाए, तो आप उसको ट्रैक कर सकते हैं। ट्रैकिंग इज अगेन वेरी वेरी इजी। आपको अपने ईमेल से इसको लिंक करना होता है, और आपकी जो इन्वेस्टमेंट्स होती हैं उस ईमेल आईडी से जो लिंक्ड है, जो ग्रो पे नहीं है, वो ग्रो पे आ जाती है। एंड वंस यू हैव ट्रैक, द नेक्स्ट ऑप्शन इज स्विच, व्हिच मींस अगर आपके एक्सटर्नल म्यूचुअल फंड्स हैं, अगर आप ग्रो पे नहीं है और वो रेगुलर प्लान वाले हैं जिसमें आप कमीशन दे रहे हैं, तो आप उसको ट्रैक करके पहले ग्रो पे ला सकते हैं, और फिर उसको 0 कमीशन डायरेक्ट प्लान में स्विच कर सकते हैं। जैसा भी कि मैं हर बार कहता हूं, अगर आपके पास कोई भी डाउट हो, कोई भी क्वेरी हो जो कि आप हमसे पूछना चाहते हैं, तो आप हमारे को ईमेल लिख सकते हैं support@grow.in पे। इसके अलावा हेल्प एंड सपोर्ट सेक्शन है हमारे ऐप और वेबसाइट पे, उसके थ्रू आप हमसे चैट और कॉल पे भी रीच आउट कर सकते हैं। हमारी सोशल मीडिया प्रेजेंस सारे प्लेटफॉर्म्स पे है। हम फेसबुक पे अवेलेबल हैं, लिंक्डइन पे अवेलेबल हैं, ट्विटर पे भी अवेलेबल हैं, और यूट्यूब पे काफी इंपॉर्टेंट है, वहां पे हम इन्वेस्टमेंट्स के बारे में हर हफ्ते करीब 2 से 3 वीडियो बनाते हैं। वी मेक वीडियोस दैट आर ऑन इन्वेस्टिंग, they are on mutual funds and stocks, leaning more towards stocks के ज्यादा वीडियोस हैं। तो अगर आप नए इन्वेस्टर्स हैं, अगर आप नए इन्वेस्टर हैं और आप चाहते हैं कि और सीखें म्यूचुअल फंड्स और स्टॉक इन्वेस्टिंग के बारे में, तो आप जरूर ग्रो चैनल यूट्यूब पे जाके हमें सब्सक्राइब कर सकते हैं। We are one of the highest rated mutual fund apps. हमारे पास 70 लाख से भी ज्यादा यूजर्स हैं। प्रैक्टिकली जितनी भी म्यूचुअल फंड्स हैं हमारे प्लेटफॉर्म पे सारे अवेलेबल हैं। हमारी सारी ट्रांजैक्शन BSE स्टार MF के थ्रू होती हैं। हम एक सेबी एंड एम्फी रजिस्टर्ड ब्रोकर हैं एंड डिस्ट्रीब्यूटर हैं, और हमारी सारी जो सिक्योरिटी सिस्टम्स हैं, दे आर ऑल बैंक ग्रेड सिक्योरिटी सिस्टम्स। जो भी डेटा है सब कुछ 256 बिट एन्क्रिप्टेड होता है हमारे प्लेटफॉर्म पे, और हम एक ISO सर्टिफाइड कंपनी भी है। ये क्वेश्चन मुझे बहुत बार पूछा जाता है, तो इसलिए मैंने यहाँ पे ऑलरेडी डाल दिया है। अगर आप स्टॉक मार्केट, ग्रो पे स्टॉक मार्केट में इन्वेस्ट करने के बारे में चार्जेस जानना चाहते हैं, तो आप इस लिंक पे जाके चार्जेस को अच्छे से समझ सकते हैं, grow.in/pricing। इस लिंक पे आपको हमारे सारे ट्रांजैक्शंस के सारे डिटेल्स मिल जाएंगे। और अपकमिंग एक नया प्रोडक्ट हम ला रहे हैं, विच इज US स्टॉक्स। अगर आप यूएस के बड़े बड़े स्टॉक्स में इन्वेस्ट करना चाहते हैं, जैसे कि एप्पल, फेसबुक वगैरह वगैरह, तो वो भी आप ग्रो पे जल्द ही कर पाएंगे. इट इज कमिंग सून. इट इज नॉट अवेलेबल राइट नाउ, बट इट विल बी वेरी सून. तब तक के लिए फिलहाल आप ग्रो पे, अगर आप म्यूचुअल फंड और स्टॉक्स जहां पे सर्च करते हैं, वहां जाके किसी यूएस के कंपनी का नाम टाइप करेंगे तो उसका पेज आपको मिल जाएगा. उसके सारी डिटेल्स आप ऑलरेडी देख सकते हैं. इन्वेस्टमेंट जल्द ही आ जाएगा. With that, my talk is done. जैसा कि आपको पता है, हम Android, iOS और वेबसाइट पे अवेलेबल हैं. Now I will call Anthony and Amrita back. हम आपके questions लेना start करेंगे. Thank you.
Thanks, Shikhar. Thank you so much. So let's get started with the questions. Anthony, we also have a lot of questions for you, so I hope you're ready. Okay. The first question is, can you please explain the timetable of stock market? So I'm guessing someone is trying to ask me what are the timings of the stock market. So it is 9:15 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. Okay, so those are the timings. Next question for Anthony. What is your point of view on gold drop rates, drop in the gold rates recently? Anthony.
So it's a very complicated question to answer actually, because gold is a different asset class. All I would say is, if I were to simplify it, is gold ka performance is generally linked to uncertainty. Okay, and that's when you see a sharp performance up move in gold, when there is a lot of uncertainty, when there is a lot of panic, which is obviously a lot that we have seen in the last 6 months. The question you have to ask yourself is that, and I'm assuming the person is asking from a perspective of, whether it's worth investing in gold or is worth holding an investment in gold. I think in a long period of time, having 5 to 10% of one's portfolio in gold is not a bad thing. The fact that it has dropped a bit in the last week is just a kind of correction, a minor correction of the significant run up in gold. If I was to give you my perspective on the next 2-3 years, is gold an outstanding investment option? My simple, brutal answer is no.
Okay. All right. Okay. So I'll take the next question, which is just a minute. So the next question is, we always hear that you should do your research while picking the stocks. Please help in terms of how that can be done. Okay. So I won't say I'm an expert in it. I'll give you my few bits on what I think it should be done and how I go about identifying my stocks. Okay. So you do a quantitative analysis and you do a qualitative analysis. So when we're looking at a quantitative analysis, you basically first get the financial statements and look at certain parameters, like you could look at the revenue, you could look at the net income, you could look at the earnings per share, EPS, you could look at the PE ratio, you could look at the ROE, which is return on equity or return on assets. So you should look at all these parameters in terms of the quantitative analysis when you're looking at identifying a particular stock. Now, in terms of the qualitative analysis, you look at what is the competitive advantage of the company. Like I had mentioned in my presentation, कि इस company का competitive advantage क्या है, उनका future, what are the future businesses that they want to get into. Look at the management, how is the management and what is the management focus in terms of the business. So these are some of the qualitative measures that you could look at. But I personally think कि हर individual के अपने खुद के filters रहते हैं when it comes to investing in stocks, and those are the filters that you should stick to. क्योंकि अगर आपके कोई ऐसे filters हैं जो आपके लिए which have worked in the past, they are the ones that will work for you. Okay, so these are the filters that I put for myself, and you could have multiple filters for yourself. But this is a basic thing. Do a quantitative analysis and do a qualitative analysis, and I think to a large extent you will be sorted. Okay. The next question is for Anthony. Just a minute. So the question is, return on equity, is it important in the long term? ROE.
I'm guessing it is linked to while buying a stock or holding on to a stock. Yes, it's one of the most important things. I'll put it differently. What are we doing when we are buying a stock? We are becoming part owner of the business. Yeah. When is the owner of a business happiest? अगर आपने 100 रुपया डाला है तो you are happy when you get 20 rupees back, not when you get 10, right? So any owner of a business will be happier if for every 100 rupees he has invested in the business, he gets more of it back as eventual profits or earnings. And so any company over 5 to 10 years that is able to consistently have a decent return on equity will do well. I'll just give you, although I'm beyond a point, it's a fine line because I work in a mutual fund to give stock examples. But return on equity explains, for example, the very high price to earnings of a company like Hindustan Lever. Because effectively the amount of capital that Hindustan Lever now has to put to actually run its business is not incremental. Think about the last time Hindustan Lever actually raised money from the public. You probably have to go back 40 years, right? So the return on equity that they have is an amazingly high number, which in some ways explains the amazingly high PE. So to summarize, yes, it's important in the long term, but it depends on what stage of the business you are buying the stock in, right? To give you a parallel example, forget listed stock market, private equity. If I was buying into Flipkart 7-8 years ago, am I going to question Flipkart's management on return on equity, or am I going to figure out how many more customers Flipkart is adding every month? Right? So different metrics matter at a different point in time, but in a listed stock, the very important factor to look at is definitely return on equity.
Okay, great. Okay. The next question is for Shikhar. Shikhar, is it necessary to keep 10,000 in the Groww wallet?
No, actually, this is I think it's a misconception. बहुत लोगों को ये गलतफहमी हो गई है. You do not have to keep any amount of money in the Groww balance. You can invest with the money kept in the Groww balance, but it is not mandatory to keep money in it. आपको जब भी invest करना है आप उसमें डाल सकते हैं. और बहुत investors ऐसे होते हैं कि उन्होंने वहां पे पैसा डाला और उनको जब लगा कि अभी इन्वेस्ट करना है तो वो वहां से डायरेक्टली निकाल के डाल देंगे. But it is not necessary to keep any money in Groww balance. There is no returns. It is आप अगर 10,000 रुपए वहां रखेंगे तो आपको उस पर कोई रिटर्न्स नहीं मिलेंगे. वो 10,000 के 10,000 ही रहेंगे. And after a brief interval of time, अगर आप उस पैसे को यूज नहीं करेंगे तो ऑटोमेटिकली Groww balance आपके उस पैसे को वापस आपके बैंक अकाउंट में डाल देगा. So it is not necessary, and use it only for investments and nothing else.
Fair. I'll take the next question, which is, and I'll take two questions together. So first is, will mid caps continue to outperform? And the second is, how long is long term? That was one of the questions that I had got. Well, I do think that mid caps are going to do well in the near future. You should definitely look at investing in mid caps. अगर आपका time horizon relatively long term है तो. Okay, and when I say long term, because this is a question I've got quite a few times, long term का मतलब होता है कम से कम 5 साल. Minimum of 5 to 7 years is what you should look at when you're investing for the long term. Okay. So yeah, so I do personally think, I mean, that's my personal take. Anthony, you may want to correct me, but I do think that mid caps are here to stay, and if you're investing for the long term, you're quite sorted there.
Yeah, no, I mean, very little to add to what you said. Long term can potentially be never if you have the right stock.
Yeah. Fair. Okay. So next question for you. What changes have you made in your investing style because of the pandemic?
So, Namrata, आपने actually refer किया था when you were discussing about saying each investor should adapt. Investing style should never change. There is a particular way of investing that I know. I have been doing it for the last 25 years. I will do it till the day I retire. Investing style doesn't change. Your outlook will change. Your perspective will change. जो market आपको trends बता रहा है वो आपको change करेगा. But if for whatever reason, let me give you a simple basic example. I am a growth investor. What does it mean? My investing style is a growth style. It means that when you look at my portfolio, you will typically find companies with higher rates of growth year on year, and I'm happy to pay higher prices for it. Versus you look at it as a value investor. A value investor will always be a person who says, when is a stock beaten down relative to its historic value? Both styles of investing will work well in the long term if you make the right common sense calls. You never change your investment style. I'm today a momentum investor because momentum chal raha hai. Then tomorrow long term is the flavor, तो मैं long term बनूंगा. That will only have a disastrous result. I'll just give one additional data point. This is part of the work that I've done in my previous firm. Very interesting. So it had analyzed the performance of the top 200 stocks in a 2-year bull market. And there were many such 2-year bull markets. And it analyzed the best performing stocks, the top 10 stocks in the first 3 months, and then how it had done by the end of the 2 years. Okay. And we discovered that across some 10 different time frames over the last 25 years that had these occasions, 95% of the time, the stocks that led the first 3 months of the rally were out of the top 50, were not even in the top 50% by the end of the 2 years, right? So investing styles getting changed because of the pandemic? No. Does the pandemic suggest that there are newer sunrise sectors that may emerge? Definitely. Does it give us some inkling that there may be trouble for certain types of companies? Yes. So we'll adjust to it, but the investing style doesn't change. I will search for growth. The difference is my perspective on which company is now going to grow has changed because of the pandemic.
Okay, great. I mean, honestly, I love the answer because, so nicely said, right? Your investing style cannot change. I mean, it has to be there. I mean, whether you're a value style investor, growth style investor, you stay the same. You can't keep
Correct.
changing based on the flavor of the market. So true. So the next question, someone's asking a very basic question. What is the difference between value style and growth style? So, just giving you a very quick answer. Value style stocks क्या होते हैं कि which are available at a lower price. So basically, a stock which is at this point in time available at a reasonable rate and which you can pick up, which has decent potential in the future. A growth style stock is basically something which has very high potential in the future and you want to be a part of the growth story of that particular company. So growth style stocks would be stocks which are existing, which are doing well, but have very high potential in the future, and value style which are available at a lower value and you want to make use of the opportunity. Okay. The next question is for Shikhar. So Shikhar, how do I know my next SIP payment date on Groww?
So when you would have set your SIP, आपने जब अपना SIP set किया होगा तो आपने एक date चुना होगा. The SIP date is usually on that date, or it could happen a few days before that chosen date. क्योंकि कभी-कभी ऐसा होता है कि जिस प्लेटफॉर्म के साथ हम काम कर रहे हैं वो उसको थोड़ा जल्दी ट्रिगर कर देती है. So it is either on the date you set. अगर आपने चूज किया था कि महीने के हर every third of a month, हर 3 तारीख को आपका SIP कटेगा, तो या तो SIP 3 को कटेगा या उसके 5 दिन पहले तक कट सकता है. If the third or the date chosen by you is a holiday, then it will get cut on the next working day.
Okay, great. All right, Anthony, the next question is for you. The economy and market is currently very volatile for short-term investment. What is your view on this?
My view is very simple. This is not a market for the short-term investor. It is a short-term investor right now, to my mind, is either very courageous or very foolish or both. I think anybody who's investing in equity at this juncture has to do it because they have a minimum 5-year time frame. Number one. And number two, because in terms of their overall goals they want to achieve, they are right now under-invested in equity. If those two things are met, you should definitely be investing in equity at this point. Over a 6-month or a 1-year time frame, whether it is a mutual fund or it is an equity stock, it's extremely difficult to predict because things are going to be volatile. We discuss so much about COVID pandemic. One of the biggest events I think that is going to start affecting markets in the next 2 months is going to be the US election. Because as we get closer, and we've seen in our elections, right, how politicians make statements obviously to gain votes, but there is, in fact, I remember JP Morgan had threatened to launch a Trump index because they said the market movement relative to when Trump made such statement was far more significant than actually the Fed doing something. So next 6 months to a year, lots of things will happen. We have to figure out whether vaccine. See, it's like this. Let's think of it this way. What if 45 days from now, miraculously, it is announced that a vaccine has been found, which is feasible, can be given to tens of millions of people at less than 10 rupees a dose, and can be done in the next 30 days. Where do you think the market will be? I can tell you, it will be 50% higher than here. On the other hand, if 45 days from now, you get a scenario where people say that in the US, there is now a second wave and there are 100,000 people getting affected every single day, how do you think the market is going to react? Do either of these scenarios we know are going to happen? We don't know. So that's what the next 6 months is going to be. Lots of uncertainty. So therefore, have a 5-year time frame if you're investing in equity at this juncture.
Great. Yeah. The next question is, I'll take that question. Why are the debt gilt funds doing so bad from the last 1 month? Well, with inflation going up, the expectation is that the interest rates would either go up or would remain the same. And if interest rates are expected to go up, then automatically your bond prices come down, which obviously lead to the losses. So, which is, I think, I think that's one of the reasons why, the gilt funds are not doing so well. Okay, the next question is, what should the students aim for when it comes down to investments? Indian students who can't invest more than 1,000 a month, Anthony, I mean.
So, this is a session that was on large and mid caps, but the person who's asked this question, aapne mere dil chhu liya, because I, by the way, separately do lots of sessions pro bono for young kids, because if there is one lesson I wish somebody taught me when I was 20 years old, as you can see from my gray hair, it was a very long time ago, is the investing as early as possible is the biggest thing you can do, right? So even if you start with $1,000, I would tell the person who asked the question, get onto an Excel sheet, put $1,000 at 15% compounded every month for the next 20 years and see what that number is. You'll be astonished.
Yeah.
Right? I will say if you invest $1,000 from the age of 20, it's as good as investing $10,000 from the age of 30 or 35. That's what the maths will show you. So $1,000 is fine. In fact, what is even better and more brilliant is आप invest कर रहे हो. क्योंकि आप जो 20 years, like I said, if I had started investing when I was 20, I would be right now in Hawaii, retired very peacefully.
Yeah.
Because I started much later, I have to invest a lot more and I will have to work for a lot longer.
No, I mean, I completely agree with Anthony. And just to add to this, I started my investment at the age of 18. So I'm an engineer by qualification. My mom used to give me 2,000 rupees pocket money, out of which I used to invest 500 rupees in an SIP every month. And I did that for my 4 years of engineering. So I totally understand the value of starting your investments early. And I strongly, recommend to whoever this individual is that 1,000 rupees can take you a long way. If you have 1,000 rupees to invest today, start an SIP and just get started with your investments. Trust me, you'll do exceptionally well in terms of long-term wealth creation. Okay. So what do you mean by long-term? I think I've already said that. A minimum of 5 years is what you have to look at if you're looking at a long-term time horizon. The longer the better. Jitna lambe samay ke liye invest kar sakte hain, great, but a minimum of 5 years. Anthony, what about slowing GDP growth? Next question for you.
So, an interesting question. See, a stock market or a stock eventually is a slave of the earnings of that company, right? So, a slowing GDP does not mean that every company will slow. So, I'll give you a very interesting data point. Most insurance companies in the quarter April to June have shown a growth over last year, actually. So if you may say COVID, pandemic, etc., but actually insurance as a sector has done better than last year. Pharma as a sector has done better than last year. So slowing GDP growth does not mean is the end of the world, number one. Number two, there's a lot of data scientists that have done this correlation and have there's enough of reports that suggest that there is not so much a correlation between GDP growth and stock markets as you think there is.
Yeah.
So yes, there will be slowing GDP growth, but let's also remind ourselves there was slowing GDP growth even before the pandemic. ऐसा नहीं है कि slowing GDP growth has happened because of the pandemic. We had a problem even before, and there will be companies that will do all right even if GDP is slow, and there will be companies that will do badly. point is you've got to be able to identify and be out of the right companies.
Okay. Yep. Thank you. Shikhar, how often do you have these sessions? Next question. This individual is very inspired and wants to attend all the sessions. So he wants to know how often do you do these sessions? I mean, I don't know. I mean, is there anything else that you're doing apart from these weekly sessions that we have? You may want
no, we have these weekly sessions every week. आप सबको पता है, and आप यहीं पे आ सकते हैं, हमारे YouTube channel को follow कर लीजिए. This is a separate YouTube channel, Groww MF. वहाँ से आपको you can easily view our sessions. Usually, almost every week. Usually, it is at this time, 4:30 Friday.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So there's one person who wants to know about your investment journey, Anthony sir. He wants to know, can you talk about your investing journey?
Yeah, I absolutely can. So I had the great blessing ki my dad was a public sector, good, honest servant who the only good thing he did from an investing standpoint is to invest in equity. So I had a flavor of equity. The first investment I made in equity sounds terrible because I am supposed to be a professional now. Is from the little bit of learning I did from Economic Times, I actually bought a company called Bihar Alloys. I still remember in the early 90s at 17 rupees. This was at the time of Harshad Mehta time. I sold it at some 65. So I was very excited. 4-time return in 1 year. That company basically ceased to exist after 3 years. And I figured that now knowing what I know, I would have never bought that company. But it was a tremendously successful investment. Other than that, my investing journey has been I've learned along the way. I continue to learn. You can never be inch perfect. Today, 90% of what I hold is in mutual funds. Like I said, it's because I have multiple restrictions. I also have very little time. Uh, and I don't have too much of real estate at this juncture. So that's my investing journey. I've been a beneficiary of the real estate boom, but otherwise it's a mix of equity funds and short-term bond funds. And while I told somebody earlier in the show कि आपको 5-10% gold में रखना चाहिए, that मैंने बीवी को I left it to my wife to do that. I never bought gold myself, and she also doesn't like gold too much. So effectively we are very underweight gold, but ठीक है. I mean, it's basically investing journey. Like I said, lucky enough to be born in a family which kind of had somebody buying equity stocks. So you kind of get that into your DNA. And I still return to the question that somebody asked. I love that question. I'm a student. I want to invest $1,000. Like I said, that I wish was my investing journey, that everything I saved that I bought an equity fund at that point, like I said, would have been in Hawaii 5 years ago.
Yeah, and honestly, like I started my career in the year 2008 when, of course, we had just entered a recession, and I know that I started my SIPs at that time. When my proper SIPs after my work student phase, and I know that at that point, within 1 year, my SIPs, my returns were great. I got amazing returns, and then in 2010, I went for my MBA to Singapore, and I know that jitna bhi savings kiya tha actually took care of my fees to a large extent. I didn't really have to take a loan, and that's only because I was very disciplined and was lucky enough to get decent returns at that time. So yeah. So great. Anthony sir, I think next question very relevant. Someone wants to know more about the NFO, so if you could just explain that.
Yeah, so we have a very different philosophy to launching NFOs. You know, mutual funds काफी NFOs करते रहते हैं. In last 6 months, you have seen a slew of NFOs. Sometimes it's an easier way to get money at one point. We have typically done only one NFO a year. This is our only NFO for 2020, frankly. And we actually had approval from SEBI to do this NFO in December last year. But we thought markets were kind of fairly toppish at that point. The logic, like I said, which is why, see, I did a plug for our NFO if you presentation, but I spent only a slide on it because you should buy the NFO if you buy the concept that this is the right time to invest in a mix of large and mid cap stocks for a 5-year period. If you believe that, then invest in the NFO. If you don't believe that, or you don't have the 5-year time frame, then don't invest in the NFO. Sounds very strange coming from a person who would be very happy if you invested, but if you believe that the journey of the next 10 years of the stock market is going to be success stories of both large and mid companies, and you have a luxury of that time to give to your investment, then look at the NFO.
Yep. Okay. Sure. Great. Okay. And can we do an SIP for the long term?
So my suggestion would be do an SIP if you want to as well. No problem. That it depends on your mode of investing that you're comfortable with, right? There is, I mean, to give you, somebody asked me, I mean, you asked about the investing style. So that's actually one thing which is very unusual to say, that the one thing having been part of the industry, and I'm part of the industry trade association board that has been involved in the mutual fund Sahi Hai campaign, which talks about SIP. I don't have a lot of SIPs personally. Because for me, the greatest comfort has been that I believe I have the discipline to invest in equity. If things are looking bad, I invest, right? I have invested in March and April because I have learned to my cost in previous years that, I was thinking ki mandi hai mat karo. I've learned that lesson the hard way. So I do a lot of lump sum investing, but I think SIPs work as beautifully. So yeah, it's up to you. You want to start an SIP in this fund, please do so. You want to do lump sum, that really depends on your kind of perspective and your profile.
Okay. Next question. We're getting a few debt-related questions in a session on large and mid caps, but is it a good time to invest in short duration debt funds as lump sum?
Yes, I can take that. In fact, I would go as far as to say that as a house, the only fund category we are recommending at this point is short-term debt. We are actually not recommending gilt. We are not recommending PSU bond funds. We are not recommending corporate bond funds. We certainly aren't recommending credit risk funds. We are actually only recommending short-term bond funds because just a common sense thing. It's related similarly to equity from a perspective. When do you commit to the long term in fixed income to a rate? It's when interest rates are high, right? I would rather buy a 5-year FD when rates are high. What is the point of buying a 5-year FD giving 5% now? Right. So if we are all clear that interest rates have fallen a lot because of the pandemic, rates have been cut, etc., but we have reached the end, I don't want to commit long-term money to at this juncture. So I think short-term debt is frankly the standout debt option at this point.
Okay. Shikhar, can we invest in US stocks in the future? I mean, you already said that, but I don't know. We've got this question. You may want to reiterate.
Yeah, मैंने अपने presentation में ये already बोला था. US stock investment is coming to grow. We have built the platform. We are testing it, and बहुत जल्दी आपको ये available हो जाएगा.
Okay. I think just last question. We have some theoretical questions which both of you may want to answer, and maybe even I could pitch in. One is, what are some of the books that we recommend from an investing point of view? So there are some books that people want to know of. Would you want
So I, frankly, because my entire life is about investing, I end up reading other things than investing books. But two books I would actually recommend to anybody are the following. There's a book called The Intelligent Investor by Ben Graham. He's kind of the godfather of value investing. It's not because I think value investing is the way to go, but it's a great book about how you should think about how companies are valued. The other one, which is I think even more brilliant, is a book called Rich Dad Poor Dad. Right? It's really about how it teaches you that the best thing to do in life is to make money from money, not to be obsessed about working in your day job. Because people who continue working in their day job, basically his argument is people who work on a day job and that's their entire life stay poor, and people who believe that there are ways to make money from money become rich. It's a great book in my view.
Okay. And just this one person who's asking that he's 20 years old and wants to invest for the long term, but he's not familiar with certain terms. So where can he get more info about learning about terms and, any YouTube channel? So I would strongly recommend the Groww YouTube channel. I mean, it's great videos to understand basics about investments. But then if both of you may want to add to it.
No, so I mean, so sorry, Shikhar, you want to go first?
Shikhar, are you there? Can you hear us?
Okay, maybe I can just take a shot at this. So yes,
Sorry, I think I lost the connection in between. Sorry.
Yeah, Shikhar, do you want to answer this first? Then I can answer it.
What was the question?
Okay,
The
so then
question-
Namrata, go ahead.
Yeah, so the question is that there's this individual who's pretty young, he's 20 years old, wants to invest for the long term, is either looking for different links where he could learn about different concepts about investing, or YouTube links. So I did say that Groww YouTube channel, because I do think Groww YouTube channel is great, a lot of good videos on investing. But apart from that, anything else both of you would want to recommend?
Sure. So a couple of things that I personally, I'm only 26, by the way, just to, so I'm more or less in your spectrum. So some things that I did when I was studying in college, and now since this is my first job, so since I've practically been learning investment in my job. So some of the things that I feel that is very relevant is, you have to understand that 20 years ago, we didn't have the blog atmosphere or infrastructure that we have today. We have so many podcasts, we have excellent blogs. Since I'm involved and my team is involved in this, I would highly recommend that you check out the Groww blog, because we update it very regularly. But apart from this also, you will find many book recommendations, and they are great. But what I would also suggest is, apart from reading books, this is a bit, I would say, contra in terms of reading, but I would really recommend you follow some of the biggest and the best blogs and podcasts, and also people on Twitter. The risk with Twitter is that there is also a lot of froth there. There's a lot of, when the markets do poorly, everybody's easy to panic. So that might mislead you. But I would personally suggest that you do spend a lot of time trying to read blogs and podcasts in addition to books. Books are definitely number one. And obviously there are a lot of good YouTube channels, but in this era, we've had a great boom of content. And the problem with that is there are a lot of blogs and podcasts and YouTube channels, the content of which is very not good. There's also a lot of clickbaity content. So be careful when you're dealing with that.
Yeah, see, only thing I would add, and by the way, I completely endorse. I personally do this and it will sound strange, right? I'm 47, by the way, and I follow anybody who, for example, follows me on Twitter will see something very bizarre. I don't tweet. I only follow. And why do I follow? I follow a lot of people that I think write really interesting stuff about the investing world, because it helps me gain knowledge, right? So I think if you follow the right people in Twitter, very interesting. But it's also very dangerous, because I see so many people kind of on Twitter tweeting, ye stock le lo, stop loss itna low, kar lo, and I cringe, because I just think how many innocent victims are going to be there because of that. The other thing is that NISM has these relatively low cost certifications to become, there are courses on equity research, certifications on that. Pick that up, because some of the study material on that will actually give you some perspective. It's not as dated as you think it is. Our typical mindset is our textbooks have not changed for many years. But the securities market regulator to that extent is very decent, and they kind of insist that these textbooks get updated. So for example, if you were trying to become a mutual fund distributor, I'm not suggesting anybody on this channel should, but the stuff you have to learn is actually very relevant, very current, and you'll understand what a mutual fund is actually through that kind of stuff. So that's another suggestion.
Okay. Two books that I would like to suggest, for our participants. There's this book called Coffee Can Investing, which I personally really like. And there's another book called Thinking Fast and Slow. I do think that these two books are pretty relevant, very easy to read, and they give us a lot of information about investing. So feel free to check them out, Coffee Can Investing and Think Fast and Slow, and I think you'll learn quite a lot from there. Great. So I think we are done with the session. We overshot quite a lot. I hope the session was useful to all the participants, to all the people who are watching us. And we'll come back next week for another interesting session. So thank you so much, guys. Thanks to all of us.
Yeah. Thank you, Namrata.
Thanks, Anthony. Thanks, Shikhar. Take care. Bye-bye.
Yep. Have a good day. Bye. Take care.